6th. This is the 18th annual Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, live from the campus of the University of Southern California, just south of downtown Los Angeles. As you can see, it's a picture-perfect Southern California day. The Chamber of Commerce could not have ordered a nicer day if they had tried, and our live coverage continues. Well, over here on our set, next to the C-SPAN bus, we're joined by Bo Kilmer, who is one of the co-authors of this book, Marijuana Legalization, What Everyone Needs to Know. Mr. Kilmer is with the RAND Corporation. Yes. Mr. Kilmer, if you would, start by making an argument for legalizing marijuana and against legalizing marijuana.
Oh, there are a number of arguments that can be made on either side. Some folks that want to legalize marijuana aren't happy with the fact that there are 800,000 arrests every year for marijuana possession. They're unhappy that people are being put through the criminal justice system for consuming a substance that they believe is safer than alcohol. And some people argue that if you were to legalize marijuana, you would be able to tax it, and then that would generate revenue. On the other side, a lot of people have concerns about making another intoxicant legal. They look at what's happened with the alcohol and the tobacco industries, and they say, we don't want that. There are also concerns about, especially if there are for-profit companies, you have to have there are concerns about, whether or not there'll be advertising. And people are also concerned about what's going to happen to the price. So this is a very much a complex debate, and that's kind of why we put the book together. For those people that haven't made up their decisions or made up their minds, we're hoping that they will read the book and be more informed.
As somebody who has studied this, where do you come down?
Well, I do work for RAND, and we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization, and our goal is really to provide information to inform policy and decisions. We don't have an official policy or position on drug policy, and we won't. And so the book kind of walks through the the different arguments about legalization. And what's interesting at the end of the book, so we have 15 chapters in the book, about 150 frequently asked questions, and ranging from what is marijuana to what is THC to how would you actually tax it. And so I wrote it with 3 other colleagues, and we work together and we all agree on the content of those first 15 chapters. But in the last chapter of the book, we actually include our opinions. And we didn't plan it, but we're kind of all over the place on this. And so I don't want to spoil it. So if you want to read my opinion, it's at the back of the book.
Well, I read it.
Okay.
So I'm going to spoil it. By the way, we're going to put up the phone numbers. Topic is marijuana legalization. We've divided our lines just a little bit differently for this segment. Pro and anti, 202-585-3885 if you are in favor of legalizing marijuana. If you're against it, 202-585-3886. is the number for you to dial. And if the phone lines are too busy to get through, you can also send Bo Kilmer a tweet. @BookTV is our Twitter handle. And you can make a comment on our Facebook page, facebook.com/BookTV. One of the angles you talk about is teenage use.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually kind of in this debate, this is one of the few things that both sides agree on. Both sides want to make sure that youth aren't going to be using more marijuana, and so this is where this price discussion really comes in, because if you were to legalize the production of marijuana, you would really reduce the production costs. Because right now, when somebody buys marijuana or methamphetamine or cocaine, a lot of what they're doing is compensating the drug dealer and everyone else along that supply chain for the risk of arrest and risk of incarceration. That goes away with full legalization. You'd also expect there to be, kind of economies of scale as people move away from backyards and basements into kind of big industrial grows. And so for a number of reasons, we would expect those production costs to go down. Now, the decisions that a state or any other jurisdiction makes about this, what the decisions they make about what type of production to allow and what to tax, that's really going to end up kind of shaping what the retail price ends up being. And this is important because we know that youth are sensitive to the price. So this is something that kind of both sides are going to be paying attention to.
What's the current status of marijuana legalization across the country?
Well, it's interesting. So what happened in Colorado and Washington State in November was truly unprecedented. Before then, no modern jurisdiction had ever removed the prohibition on the commercial production, distribution, or possession of marijuana for non-medical purposes. Not even the Netherlands. And that's what's interesting about this. A lot of people say, well, why can't we just look at the Netherlands and see what they did? And you know, if you're over 18 and you walk into one of those coffee shops in Amsterdam, you're going to be able to buy up to 5 grams. Because they have an official policy of not enforcing the law against small transactions. So you can kind of think about it being legal in the front door of those coffee shops. But it's still illegal to produce and to sell the marijuana to those coffee shops. So it's actually illegal. And so what that does is it kind of inflates the price. So what was passed in Washington and Colorado would allow for-profit companies to come in and produce. And so that's very different. And this is very different from this other term that gets thrown around, decriminalization. A lot of people use them, legalization and decriminalization, interchangeably, and that's incorrect. You know, probably 18, 19 states have decriminalized marijuana, but that just means kind of lowering the penalties for possession. You know, taking it from being a misdemeanor to having it be a citation. But when people talk about decriminalization, that really has nothing to do with production and distribution. That's why legalization and what happened in Colorado and Washington is so significant.
What does it cost governments, the federal government, to having marijuana be illegal, enforcement, incarceration, et cetera?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so I don't know what it is for the federal government, but some of the RAND research we did in 2009, 2010, when California was thinking about legalizing with Proposition 19, we kind of looked into this. And so before we did our analysis, we did a literature review and found that there were 2 estimates out there about how much money California taxpayers spend enforcing prohibition against marijuana. One study put it at about $200 million a year. Another study put it at $2 billion a year. I mean, that's a big difference. And so for this, you know, we were able to get information about arrests, adjudication, how many people are incarcerated, and, you know, kind of slap on some unit costs. And our best estimates were much closer to that $200 million a year for the state of California.
How many users in the U.S.?
Right now, there's about 17 million people that admit to using in the previous month. And we know that sometimes on these surveys, people aren't always honest. So it would be at least 17 million. But what's interesting is when you really begin 17 million in the past month. But when you think about who's driving the market, and you know, and where's most of the money going to come from, it's going to be those individuals who are your daily to near daily users. It's those individuals that drive most of the consumption and will account for most of the expenditures. In the same way with alcohol too. It's a small number of users that really are, you know, providing a disproportionate amount of revenue and consumption. 17
million admit in the last month. What about, do you have any comparable stats with cigarettes and alcohol?
Oh, I think for alcohol last month it may be around 50 million. I'm not actually, no, I'm sure it'll probably be higher than that.
Bo Kilmer is our guest. Marijuana legalization is the topic. Our lines are divided pro and anti. And our first call comes on the pro line from Luke in Brazil, Indiana. Luke, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you very much. Hey, here's my thing. Last August, I remember Mitt Romney saying how he was against pot, not just recreational pot, he was against medical marijuana. And, of course, in November, Obama won Colorado, and more people voted for recreational pot than voted for Obama. And since the election, the Republicans have been talking about how they need to reach out to Latinos and reach out to black people and the gays. But I don't hear any of them talking about legalizing pot. You know, maybe they could have won Colorado. And also, the other thing is this. At the beginning of the year, there was about 15 minutes on C-SPAN in your studio. You had a man on that was pro-pot, and then you had a man on, I forget his name, he's a retired congressman, Republican congressman from the Heritage Foundation. Again, that was against pot, the legalization of pot. And again, it's the same thing. You know, today I heard Ed Foylner earlier on C-SPAN talking about how they're pro-free market, limited government, and yet these guys come out against pot, legalized pot.
All right, Luke, thanks for your comments. We will get an answer from Bo Kilmer.
Yeah, no, it's if you look at the latest polls, a study done by Pew got a lot of attention a couple weeks ago, and it came out suggesting that 52% of the respondents approved of legalizing marijuana use. There's been a big change over time. There was another poll. The Gallup organization has been doing the same poll kind of over time, and we know that in the mid 90s. If you look, when people were asked the questions, do you approve of legalizing marijuana use, it was about 25%. Now it's much closer to 50%. So there has been kind of this big change in public opinion. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but part of it's just kind of a change in demographics too. We know that younger voters tend to be more supportive of marijuana legalization. Those that in that last Gallup poll, those that are aged 18 to 29 were twice as likely to approve of marijuana legalization compared to those that were 65 and older.
Edward, on our anti-line from Memphis, Tennessee, please go ahead.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. My thoughts are this. Yeah, marijuana is not the worst thing in the world, but it should not be overly criminalized. It doesn't do any good. I know from my own experience that the substance wasn't the worst, but I knew that if I smoked it, I couldn't do my next 3 days' job worth of darn. What really worries me is this, that if commercialism gets into it, who's to say what percentage of cannabis, THC, whatever, is in the content? That'll be a whole bag of worms. And I do know this, that young people, if they start getting into it, they're not going to care too much about their studies or anything. Maybe for older people after their 20s, established in life, a little bit of recreation. But no, even though it isn't the worst thing in the world, it should not be widely available here. And that's my thought.
Thank you, Edward. Bo Kilmer.
Yeah, no, you raise a really interesting point there about commercialization. For the other 48 states, it is, production is prohibited, and then there's a lot of discussion about, do we want to treat it like alcohol, But if you're a decision maker and you want to do something different than prohibited, than kind of the current prohibition, you have a number of options. One option could be to treat it like alcohol and let it be, with promotion and let it be sold in stores. But there's a lot of middle ground there too. I mean, one could, allow nonprofit co-ops to sell it and not advertise, or just allow home growing. Another option, if you're thinking about doing something different, would be a state monopoly, where you could actually have the governments kind of reap in some of the revenue, and then they would also be able to control the advertising and the price and the THC content. But that doesn't get a lot of discussion in the United States because a state can't order its employees to violate federal law. I mean, that's what's. We're having these discussions about what's, different policies in these states, but this is still all illegal under federal law. And so far, the federal agencies haven't come out and said how they're going to handle the situation in Colorado or in Washington.
Any stats on how many people here in California have prescriptions for medical marijuana?
Actually, I don't know that. It's in the tens of thousands, at least.
Is it tightly restricted? Is it carefully monitored, or? Oh, okay.
No. And it's important that I think there are 18 or 19 states now that have allowances for medical marijuana. And, these states differ in terms of what they allow, what ailments they allow the medical marijuana to be used for. And they also differ by how people are allowed to get it. The dispensaries in California and the dispensaries in Colorado, they get a lot of attention. But not all states with medical marijuana allow these dispensaries. So there's a lot of variation there. So, medical marijuana isn't just this kind of homogenous concept.
Bo Kilmer is one of the co-authors of Marijuana Legalization, a primer on the topic. Mike is pro, and Mike is in Modesto, California. Hi, Mike.
Hi. Yeah, I want you to
Please go ahead.
get Bo's. Steve, I want you to get Bo's what he put down his personal opinion at the end of the book there. Anyway, about 66, a friend of mine and I, we went to the LA County Sheriff's had this big meeting. Here's, get the folks to find out what's going on with your kids and whatever. So he tells a story about how the reason they knew that marijuana led to heroin was because a certain percentage of people busted for marijuana were subsequently busted for heroin, which did not prove a causality. It proved that getting caught for marijuana and you're screwed, your life went down the tubes, including possible heroin. I know people got rolled up and thrown in the hardcore LA County jail, and one committed suicide in there. Anyway, and then about the medical marijuana, regular doctors don't write scripts in California for this. There are certain specialists. I know my nephew met a guy in a parking lot who gave him his script, and then of course the dispensaries, he just a bunch of hopheads but I like to see some of these anti-marijuana people when their mother is got this horrible cancer and can't eat. I want to see where they stand on the marijuana. Anyway, a little wound up, sorry.
Mike's a little wound up about this topic. And Bo Kilmer, what's your response to that caller?
Well, you raised the issue of whether or not marijuana is a gateway drug. And, I mean, we could spend 45 minutes just talking about that. The argument being that those who use, cocaine and heroin, many of them did use marijuana, but most of the people that do use marijuana don't go on to use cocaine. They don't go on to use heroin. That said, there have been some good studies done which have shown that those individuals who do use marijuana are more likely to go on to use these other drugs, that they find that there's a correlation there. But the caller raises a good point about with those particular studies, you still have concerns about whether or not there may be some other third factor that could be driving it. So maybe it wasn't the marijuana use. And in fact, some of my colleagues at RAND have done some simulations just showing that there could be other explanations for this. So to be honest, I think this gateway argument probably gets too much attention in the in legalization debates. There's also this other piece of this about, well, if you were able to separate out the marijuana market from if it's no longer illicit, will people be less likely to interact with those who are selling harder drugs? And that just really is an empirical question. But if you really are concerned about a substance here and how marijuana legalization is going to affect it, of course, aside from marijuana, you'd want to start thinking about alcohol.
Bo Kilmer, what about drinking and driving laws, smoking and driving laws? Should there be restrictions against operating motor vehicles and smoking marijuana?
Well, that's what's interesting about what happened in Colorado and what happened in Washington State. In Washington, as part of their initiative, they actually created a threshold for the amount of THC you have. So kind of similar to the 0.08 we have for blood alcohol. In Colorado, they didn't. It wasn't part of the amendment. Now, in Colorado, the legislature is still kind of working on a number of issues, and so it's unclear about whether or not they're going to put it in there. But this is something that if you're thinking about legalizing marijuana, it's something you're going to have to grapple with, and it's really tough in terms of coming up with a particular threshold because THC stays in the system for a while, and it can be stored in fat cells. So it makes it very hard to kind of measure this. And so I think, over time, we're just going to get more science on this.
From Port Arthur, Texas, Gil is calling on our anti-legalization line. Hi, Gil.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank C-SPAN for having such progressive topics on the Book TV show. So thank you very much, sir. My question is, what has the RAND Research Department has done on information coming out of the Green Triangle up in Northern California? I'll hang up, and thank you for taking my call.
Yeah. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? It was about the Green Triangle, Emerald Triangle?
He called. He already hung up. Sorry about that. But
okay.
Bo Kilmer, he asked about the Green Triangle up in Northern California.
Oh, I think he's referring to the Emerald Triangle,
okay.
where there is
which is what?
Up near Humboldt County, and this is where there is a lot of production.
Legal or illegal?
Well, it depends, because some of it is for the medical market here in California, and some of it is not for the medical market. But there is a tremendous amount of production there.
Okay. And is there a lot of enforcement up there? Is there?
It depends in terms of, different counties have different policies about how they're going, medical marijuana laws, how many plants they're going to allow, and but it's important to distinguish between their state level enforcement, then there's also federal enforcement too. And so, as I said, this is still all illegal under federal law. So you do have federal raids on different dispensaries, and the federal agencies are still cutting down marijuana plants in some places. And so what that does, though, is because, as I mentioned before, that threat, that kind of that risk of arrest, risk of incarceration, what that ends up doing is it helps to it inflates the costs of producing the marijuana.
Marijuana legalization, this primer was published by Oxford, and Kathy's on the line from Brooklyn, New York, on our pro-legalization line. Kathy, go ahead.
Yes, I want to say I'm 61 years old. I went to college in the 70s. I was so anti-marijuana, I can't tell you. Even though I was a liberal, my dad said, it's illegal, you can't do it. And honestly, when I smoked, I tried it like 2 times. I didn't get anything from it. I was taking Bavance, which was for ADHD. I decided to go off of it. I was going through all kinds of horrible withdrawal because, after all, it's kind of a buffered amphetamine. And my son said, why don't you try marijuana? And I thought, well, okay, I will. In New York, if you're probably Latino or African-American, they go after you. If you live in, I live in Dumbo, it's kind of a decent area, they don't care. You have, people coming to your house to tell you all these varieties of things. I have a vaporizer, so I'm not so worried about my lungs. It saved my life. Honestly, it saved my life. Now, I believe within 5 to 7 years it's going to be legal in every state. And I hope federally it is. Now, when I think of people drinking, and I know plenty of people who cannot drink socially, and they go out and they drive. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't have a car anymore. We used to live in a state where we had 4 cars, so all the kids and myself. I would much prefer them to go with a moderate amount of alcohol, not alcohol, marijuana in their systems and alcohol. I think even the
Kathy,
yeah.
Well, how often do you use marijuana?
Well, it's funny. Some people say it's hard. I have these anxiety attacks. I never did before until I went off this buffered speed kind of thing. I usually use it once in the morning with a vaporizer, and Bo can tell you about a vaporizer because I never smoke. I want to take care of my lungs. If I have another kind of panic attack early afternoon, I may use it, but I've gotten down to once a day. The dealer comes to my house. He's scared now, but we're dealing. Well, anyway, I just like to talk to him, and I just hope it becomes legal. If they tax it, it's good for the state because we need money, and I think it's a good thing to control it. I'd rather have that than alcohol, and I think his book's wonderful. I'm very proud of the man. Thank you.
Bo Kilmer.
Yeah. No, you're right, and I alluded to this before, but if you really, there's some people that are against marijuana legalization because they're morally opposed to intoxication. There are other people that are, for legalization because they're morally opposed to having the government tell them what to put in their bodies. And people are entitled to those opinions, and that's fine. There are other folks that really care about, what's actually going to happen, especially in terms of public health. And one of the things we kind of realized when we were writing this book, that if you're trying to do that cost-benefit analysis and trying to figure out whether or not this is going to end up being good or bad, a lot's actually going to depend on how marijuana legalization influences alcohol use. To the extent that we do think that with legalization, if the price goes down and there's promotion, we would expect consumption to go up. Nobody knows how much because it's really going to depend on the details of the different regime. But if marijuana use does go up, what's going to happen to alcohol use? Will people substitute away from alcohol and just use marijuana, or will they be more likely to use them together, have them be complementary goods? And because we know that most people that use marijuana and most people that use alcohol don't have any problems. But there are people that do have, that heavy users of marijuana users that do have, do run into problems, and it creates problems for them and their families. And so there are social costs associated with heavy marijuana use. But we also know that there are social costs associated with heavy drinking, and those social costs associated with heavy alcohol consumption really outweigh those costs associated with marijuana use. But the question is how is it going to affect that alcohol consumption? And right now, we don't have a good science base on this. We just really don't know. And even if there was a kind of genuine consensus about whether or not they were these economic substitutes or complements, it's still not even entirely clear that that research would be applicable post-legalization. So as people are paying attention to Colorado and Washington and trying to figure out, well, hey, is this a good idea or a bad idea, I really hope they'll pay attention to what happens with alcohol as well.
Linda Harper tweets in, yes to marijuana and taxing, bong pipe, lots healthier than alcohol. And from our Facebook page, Devin Wharton asks, where does the industrial use of hemp fit into this discussion?
This is, yeah, so in most states that are thinking about legalizing recreational consumption, they often are thinking about legalizing industrial hemp as well. And so, I mean, you see in stores now we have products that are made with industrial hemp, but you can't produce the industrial hemp in the United States. Most of it's coming from China or it's coming from Canada. So, no, I think, if the state were to do this, I think it would increase revenues. It's not, I mean, I think sometimes people exaggerate the, what some of the financial benefits there. But with this, there definitely would be a first mover advantage in terms of if you're a state trying to do this.
Suzanne on our anti-line from Albuquerque. Hi, Suzanne.
Yes, I'm a substance abuse counselor and really haven't, during this program, hit on very much about the health consequences of use of marijuana. I think if the Pew Foundation had done a sampling of people in the mental health field, particularly those of us who worked in substance abuse, you would have found a far greater number of people who were not for legalizing marijuana, because we've seen the effects on people's brains, the damage that is done, and this idea that it's not as bad as alcohol or it doesn't really do anything, just relaxes you, that's just simply not true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, Suzanne, that's a great point. And there's a whole chapter in our book kind of devoted to discussing the literature about the harms associated with marijuana use. And, as I said, I think most people that use alcohol and marijuana don't have problems, but it can cause serious problems for some individuals. We know that marijuana use can increase the probability of anxiety or panic attacks. It can increase the risk of traffic accidents. We know that some people do become dependent, and as I said, that causes problems for them. It causes problems with their families. And so, no, marijuana is not a benign substance. But it'll be really interesting to see, for these states that do legalize, how they regulate it. Are they going to put, limits on the amount of THC that can be consumed? How are they going to tax it? Kind of all of those decisions, I think, are going to influence, the type of marijuana that actually gets consumed, and that's going to have important implications for the health effects.
Time for one quick call from Rick, Tuckerton, New Jersey, Proline. Hi, Rick.
Hello there. I'm 58 years old, so I smoked a lot of pot back when I was in the college in the early and mid-'70s, and I knew a lot of people that did, so I'm shocked that it hasn't been legalized. But my question is, how many congressmen have smoked pot? How many politicians have smoked pot, admitted to it, and how should that affect the vote? Thank you, and I'll take it offline. Thank you.
Bo Kilmer, any response for that caller?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, are you seeing evidence that Congress is switching views on this, that perhaps in 10 years, what are we going to be talking about?
It's really going to depend on the federal response. So as I said, right now, even though Washington and Colorado have legalized the production and distribution and possession of marijuana, we still haven't heard from the federal government about how they're going to respond. And I think how the federal government responds to these states or these different federal agencies, I think that's going to send a signal not only to those states, but also to the other 48, and plus the District of Columbia. So, but that said, even beginning with Barney Frank and Ron Paul introducing legislation, I was just at the University of Oregon Law School yesterday, and Representative Blumenauer was there talking about the bill that he and also that Representative Paulus have introduced. So there is some federal discussion about it.
And if I remember correctly, William F. Buckley was a supporter of drug legalization in general.
Yep.
So, Bo Kilmer, one of the co-authors of Marijuana Legalization, What Everyone Should Know, a primer on the topic, has been our guest on Book TV on C-SPAN 2. And we are live at the LA Times Festival of Books on the campus of USC, just south of downtown Los Angeles. We're competing with bands. We're competing with Debbie Reynolds over there in another tent, and helicopters and lots of people. It's a really festive atmosphere, a lot of fun.